This is why I'm proud to introduce as our guest now, news editor at antiwar.com and friend of the show, Dave DeCamp. All right, Dave.
Hey, Russell. Thanks for having me back.
Thanks for coming on at the last minute after Christian Smalls, Amazon Union leader, didn't get delivered. We still think he might be next door. At any moment, he could turn up as a surprise package. In fact, we're hoping to get him on the show tomorrow, but we're thrilled to have you on, particularly with a few very pertinent questions to ask you. Firstly, I understand you went to that anti-war rally yesterday in Washington, D.C., and there were balloons floating about. Were people terrified at the potential that that balloon could spy on them or drift into them, maybe brush past them and cause static?
Yeah, I did see a few F-22s flying around. They might have spotted some balloons, but the rally was really great. It was the Rage Against the War Machine rally, and it brought together people from all over the political spectrum, which is, our whole thing at antiwar.com. It was organized by the Libertarian Party and the People's Party. Speakers included Jimmy Dore, who I know was on here to promote it, and Ron Paul, which was really amazing, Chris Hedges, our guy Scott Horton, just a whole list, Max Blumenthal, Dan McKnight, just a great lineup. I mean, I'm missing a lot of people because there were so many speakers. And there was a good showing. There was a few thousand. Estimates I saw were between 3,000 and 4,000, which is good. We hope for more next time, but I think it's a good start. It's the first kind of rally of its kind during this current, proxy war in Ukraine that brought together, again, everybody from the political spectrum. And they got the big names, and they spoke at the Lincoln Memorial, which was really great to see. And then they marched to the White House, and there was more speakers there. It was really just a good showing. And again, seeing the libertarians and the leftists and the conservatives just all mingling and talking, that was what made me really happy to see that they could get together on that. And I was there with my son, who's 15 months old. He just started walking. So my attention was focused on that. I wanted to write up kind of like a proper report on it, but I had a great time. It was great to meet people there, and it really invigorated me, gave me some new motivation.
I've got some pitches now for your son's autobiography if he goes on to be a significant public figure. March before I could walk, my first steps in the activist movement. No need to thank me, Dave. That's completely free. You can have that. Meanwhile, over in and also, by the way, those kind of political alliances that are forming, libertarians on the right, they're interested in individual freedom. People to the left of the Democrat Party who are interested in collective community freedom and the empowerment of communities rather than centralized government, devolution and decentralization, individual freedom. These are the banners and flags that we can all march under together, I reckon. Meanwhile, in that not a proxy war, isn't it get hotting up a bit, mate? Because Zelensky does say that it's part of his plan to take Crimea. Zelensky has said that he never planned to honor the Minsk agreement about like what's going on in Donbass, and also, isn't it pretty clear that if Crimea gets taken, we might all find ourselves in a terrible pickle, nuclear Armageddon-wise?
Yeah, and there's a few interesting points there when it comes to Crimea. So last month in January, there was a report in the New York Times that said the Biden administration was considering helping Ukraine attack Crimea. It said they weren't concerned about escalation, and this is just based on the fact that Putin hasn't used the nuke up to this point. That's all they're basing this on. Oh, he hasn't done anything yet. We don't have to worry about it, which is really unbelievable. And they quoted somebody in there from the RAND Corporation. If you're familiar with that think tank, they're funded by the U.S. military. They've been shaping U.S. foreign policy for decades. And she said, oh, Putin, he hasn't really done anything big in response to attacks on Crimea. But that's not true. In October, if you remember the truck bombing of the Kerch Bridge, which connects Crimea to the Russian mainland, after that is when Russia started the large-scale bombing of Ukraine's energy infrastructure, leaving millions of Ukrainians without power. The fact that she says that and the New York Times reports it that way, oh, they haven't done anything, it shows they don't care about Ukrainians. They're suffering much more.
Shows how dislocated are from the consequences of their actions. For the Ukrainian people, the loss of that energy was a pretty significant loss and a pretty considerable exacerbation in the conditions they're living under. And of course, we remember that bridge bombing because I feel like British special forces were significantly involved in enacting it. Remember it? By Jove, we did it. That's the British response to that line of inquiry. So what other developments around Crimea are we going to tell us about, mate?
Yeah, well, so recently, last week, Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State, he acknowledged that taking Crimea would be a red line for Putin, which, we've been saying all along, and people call us Putin apologists for that, but here's Blinken saying it. And there's also been other indications. The Pentagon briefed Congress and said they're not going to be able to retake Crimea. It's unlikely. A lot of U.S. officials have been saying this, and then you have the Ukrainians still saying that they're going to retake the peninsula. But I think behind the scenes, the U.S. is telling them, focus on this other territory for now, that, they want to push this offensive over the next few months to retake other territory that Russia controls. And there's talks that the U.S. is saying, there's reports that this aid isn't going to last forever. They don't believe that they can get these huge aid packages anymore when this latest one is exhausted, which should be by the summer. They're going to spend all of it. So that's pretty significant. But then you see Biden fly into Kiev today, or however he went on a train. I'm not sure how he got in, but to show Zelensky, that support from the U.S. And I think that's pretty big symbolic when it comes to the proxy war, the president of the United States entering a war zone. But maybe behind the scenes, in private meetings, he's telling them, all right, this aid spigot isn't going to be open forever. You got to start gaining some territory, which is what the U.S. wants them to gain territory and then negotiate. But Russia has been building up its forces for months and months, and they're starting to gain territory. So these next few months are going to be pivotal. And there's talk that they're going to try to wind things down, but anything can happen. I mean, the escalation risk is still there, of course. The risk of nuclear war and direct war between NATO and Russia has never been higher, and it's just madness. So hopefully it ends as soon as possible, and that, these next few months aren't too bad.
Dave, you're getting a lot of love in our community on Locals. That's our membership community that any of you are welcome to join at any time and get additional content and the ability to communicate directly live in the show. MCMT says, hi, Russell. I really like Dave and I'm really enjoying his contributions. Trilo Bitterus, our government only cares about world political and economic domination, not the lives of Ukrainians or Russians. What do you think, mate, about not only this conflict, but the ongoing escalation of tension between Taiwan, China, and the United States? We did earlier on a little item of how the various ways in which the territory of Taiwan, to forgive the use of that term, is comparable to Ukraine, i.e. vital resources, in this case, like the semiconductor industry, strategic benefits for the United States, already in a place where there is sort of militarization taking place. And also, what about the story that China are continuing to militarily aid Russia?
So with Taiwan, there's a lot there, and this has been going on for some time. I went over, last time I was here, so I don't want to say too much about how the U.S. used to handle it, but basically the U.S. used to give Taiwan, they would sell them weapons, but they wouldn't encourage them too much to declare independence because they knew that could start a war with China. But in recent years, the U.S. is really ramping up that support, and China is reacting immediately by increasing its military pressure on Taiwan. So that's all happening. What really concerns me with Taiwan is that in Congress, there is some opposition to the war in Ukraine, and it comes from a lot of Republicans. It's small, but it's still significant. But when it comes to Taiwan, a lot of them are all for sending these weapons, not to Ukraine, but to Taiwan. If you know Josh Hawley, he's a senator from Missouri, and he really encapsulates this line of thinking. He wrote a letter to Antony Blinken. He said, all these weapons that you're shipping to Ukraine, get them over to Taiwan. They want to really increase the flow of weapons. Some more Republicans just wrote a letter to Biden saying, add $2 billion for military aid for Taiwan in your next budget. And again, China is warning, if you keep doing this, it could lead to war in the region, but the U.S. continues to provoke them. When they first started passing these bills that had military aid for Taiwan, Mitt Romney, the senator, if you're familiar with him, he said, what we're doing is very provocative and bellicose. Mitt Romney said that, and then he voted for it anyway. He voted in favor of sending them the aid anyway. So that's the path that we're going on there. And again, it's not slowing down by any means because there's no opposition. If you know Ro Khanna from California, House Representative, Democrat, progressive, he's against the Middle East wars. He's very good on Yemen and issues like that. He just went to Taiwan this weekend. I mean, there's no opposition. And that's what really scares me. That's why I think we have to wake a lot of people up to understand that the U.S. is preparing for war in the Asia Pacific, encouraging Japan to double its military budget, giving South Korea everything it wants, sending more bombers to the Korean Peninsula, increasing bases in the Philippines, opening a new base in Guam, expanding their military presence in Micronesia. Did people vote for that? to expand the U.S. military footprint in Micronesia or Palau or the Marshall Islands. This is all happening, and people need to wake up to it and say, you know, we can't be doing this because we're going to provoke another war. And it's the people over there, unless it turns nuclear right away. It's the people in Taiwan. It's the people in Southeast Asia. It's the Chinese who are going to suffer.
It seems that we have systems that require conflict and crisis in order to sustain themselves. And in terms of US politics, currently there is no option that will not give you an escalation of global agitation. It seems like the Republican right, or the Republican Party in particular, are keen to escalate tension with China. The Democrats have for several years now demonized Russia, and the idea that diplomacy, multipolar worlds where different regions have different government that don't require intervention seems odd to me at this point in our history, when progress seems observable in the areas of technology and medicine in so many ways, that we are making such rudimentary errors when the consequences could be so grave. And, it's great that you're, the War March that you and Jimmy and everyone from Grey Zone and all those groups that we're really supportive of and consider ourselves to be allies with, creating a movement around it. But it feels like it's something that needs to become pretty radically and significantly popularized and is going to require a meaningful political base. And do you see anything like that being able to emerge, Dave?
Well, again, I was pretty hopeful after this weekend. And, I have friends in the Libertarian Party. I'm a member. I'm not too involved. I focus my work at antiwar.com, and we're a nonprofit, so we can't do political work. But I am a supporter personally. And, the Libertarian Party is the third largest political party in the U.S. And right now they're focusing on local elections. And, that's kind of our whole thing as libertarians, is decentralization and localizing. And so that's really important. And again, it comes to the coalition, I think is very important just to be able to drop it. I mean, we had Ron Paul and Dennis Kucinich at this rally. And back when they were in Congress, Kucinich, the progressive, and Ron Paul, the right-wing libertarian, they worked together on all sorts of issues that they aligned on. That's really what we have to push. And luckily, we're always talking about the mainstream media, how they control the narrative. I mean, since I've been on your show, I've been checking out Rumble more, and I see these shows on here getting huge audiences. And I think that's really encouraging. And also, Joe Rogan is the biggest media in the world. And my friend Dave Smith, I'm not sure if you're familiar with him. He's a comedian. It's a podcast called Part of the Problem. He went on Joe Rogan and he told him, the truth about how the U.S. provoked the war in Ukraine. And that got millions of views on YouTube. And so I think we're living in a very good time to be pushing this. Of course, we have the censors with big tech, but there's ways around it. And it's exciting. I'm excited. And it's tough to not get too cynical doing what I do, just writing and researching about all this horrible stuff. But again, this weekend, I'm really motivated, and I really appreciate people like you who have big platforms and are willing to have us on to speak these truths that people need to hear.
Thanks for saying that, Dave. And much of the censorship and the smearing and the shutting down of dissent and the constant projection of inane stories and the provocation of division and entrenchant, overly lobbied political parties suggests that there is an awareness that now more than ever the potential for change, because of the information and communicative advances that have occurred in the last 10, 20 years, require extreme effort to control. And, that is cause for optimism. So, Dave, thanks for coming on here. Thanks for the incredible work that you're doing. And I'm going to be in America in the next couple of weeks. So I hope that we get to connect soon. Thanks for joining us today, Dave. I appreciate it.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, thanks again for having me.
Remember that title I gave for your son's potential forthcoming autobiography, March Before I Could Walk, My First Tentative Steps as an Activist. Might become relevant, I don't know.
That's pretty great, yeah.
It was all right, wasn't it? I came up with that. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks.
Cheers, mate. Take care.